Welcome to the Timeless Dominion podcast series. We're here to share deep historical knowledge, helping you learn from the past. Don't miss out. Subscribe now.
Timeless Dominion Podcast.
When most of us think about the Arab world, Islam immediately comes to mind, right?
Absolutely. And there's a very good reason for that.
Islam really was the catalyst for this huge expansion of the Arabic people. It led to the Islamic Caliphate.
Which was, arguably the most powerful empire of its time, stretching from Spain, all the way to Central Asia?
And the Indian subcontinent, yeah. For centuries, it was just this dominant political, military, scientific, cultural center.
And Islam itself, of course, is still a massive global force today.
But that brings us to the big question for this deep dive.
What was there before Islam?
Exactly. How did Arab people live back then? How did they rule themselves? What did they actually believe in?
It's a period that often gets overlooked, I think. But understanding it helps us see the foundations, of Arab society before that massive shift.
So that's our mission today. We've gone through the sources, and we want to pull out the key nuggets, the really important insights for you.
Sort of a shortcut to getting up to speed on pre-Islamic Arabia.
Okay, let's dive in then. So the core of society back then, it was mostly nomadic, wasn't it?
Largely, yes. You're talking about these constantly moving tribal units, Bedouins.
And these tribes, they weren't just social groups, they were the main political units.
Absolutely. Everything revolved around the tribe. But it was a world of shifting alliances, constant warfare.
And not really any big, organized central states.
Extremely rare. Mostly these independent, often conflicting tribal groups.
So tell us more about the structure inside these tribes.
Well, the big emphasis was on family, on kin-related groups. They'd roam the deserts with their livestock, sheep, goats. Camels were vital.
Living in tents, the classic image.
Exactly. And it was a very patriarchal society, fiercely so.
How did that play out in practice?
Well, for one, inheritance passed only to the male children.
Only the sons.
Only the sons. Women had virtually no rights. They couldn't inherit property.
Wow.
And in tribal warfare, they could actually be seized as spoils of war.
Just take it.
Yes. And the customs allowed men to marry women they'd captured. There wasn't even a fixed limit on the number of wives a man could have.
That's stark.
It gets harsher. There was this practice where a son could technically inherit all his father's wives.
Yeah.
Except for his own biological mother, of course.
Unbelievable. And marriage itself?
Usually arranged. The bride's family would receive property camels, maybe horses, in exchange for her.
A transaction, almost.
In many ways. And the Quran itself actually mentions something from this period, the Jahiliyyah.
The period of ignorance.
That's the one. Talks about Arabs burying their daughters alive.
Why would they do that?
Sometimes, tragically, women were seen as an economic burden, or perhaps worse, a source of potential humiliation if they were captured by an enemy tribe.
It paints a picture of a really tough existence, and you mentioned the lack of central states, so no written laws, no courts, no police.
That's right. None of that formal structure we take for granted.
So if there were no laws like that, what did people rely on? How did anything function?
Well, the main purpose, the raison d'etre really, of a Bedouin tribe was to protect its own members. That was paramount.
Protection first and foremost.
Exactly. And this led directly to the concept of thar, the vendetta.
Ah, the blood feud.
Precisely. It was a core pillar of Bedouin society. If someone from your tribe was killed, their kin were obligated by custom to seek vengeance.
Leading to this constant cycle of violence.
Absolutely. The principle was blood for blood and a life for a life. It kept conflict simmering, often for generations.
Is that well documented?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
The French historian Maxime Rodinson, he put it very well. He said, the free Arabs were bound by no written code of law, and no state existed to enforce its statutes with the backing of a police force.
Right.
The only protection for a man's life was the certainty established by custom that it would be dearly bought, blood for blood and a life for a life. The vendetta there in Arabic is one of the pillars of Bedouin society.
A stark summary.
And another historian, Gustav von Grünebaum, described Arabia just before Islam as basically tribal guerrilla fighting, all against all. Lawlessness was, pretty much the norm.
And this violence wasn't just internal. between tribes.
No, not at all. Tribes would often attack and plunder caravans passing through their territory or raid sedentary settlements, the few towns and villages that existed.
So those settlements had to protect themselves.
Or pay up. Often these groups would pay tributes to powerful Bedouin tribes just to be left alone, to avoid raids.
It really drives home how the harshness of the Arabian Peninsula, the environment itself, must have reinforced this whole tribal system.
Absolutely. Protection, economic cooperation within your tribe. It wasn't just a good idea, it was often the difference between surviving and, well, not surviving. Death was always close.
It's a vivid picture, yeah. Hardship, independence, constant conflict. But you mentioned sedentary settlements. Did some groups manage to settle down?
They did, yes. While nomadism was dominant, some tribes did transition. And this led to the rise of actual urban centers.
Okay, so which ones were important?
In the Hijaz region, definitely Mecca and Yathrib. Yathrib, of course, later became known as Medina.
Let's talk about Mecca first. It seems central.
It really was, for two main reasons.
Yeah.
First, trade. By the 5th century or so, it was largely controlled by this very skilled merchant tribe, the Quraysh.
The Quraysh, right. Prophet Muhammad's tribe later on.
The very same. Mecca became this crucial trade hub. Why? Well, the traditional routes, like the Red Sea or along the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, they were becoming dangerous.
Why dangerous?
Piracy was a problem, but also the ongoing conflict between the big empires, Rome, well, the Byzantines by then, and Persia. It disrupted everything.
So trade shifted inland.
Exactly. Caravans got diverted through the Arabian interior, and Mecca was perfectly placed. The Meccans were smart, too. They made treaties with the Byzantines and with Bedouin tribes to ensure safe passage for their caravans.
Okay, so a major trade center. What was the second reason for its importance?
Religion. Even in this largely polytheistic era, the Kaaba in Mecca was considered incredibly sacred, a very holy temple.
The Kaaba housed idols back then?
Oh, yes. Statues of various gods and idols.
Yeah.
The chief god for the Quraysh tribe themselves was called Hubal, and his statue was there.
And this wasn't just a local belief.
No, it seems widespread.
Yeah.
We have the Greek historian 𝘗𝘩𝘀 Siculus writing way back between 60 and 30 BC, saying the Kaaba was exceedingly revered by all Arabians.
Wow. Any idea how many idols were there?
Estimates suggest maybe up to 360 statues and images. There are also some, let's say, disputed later Islamic sources that claim there were even images of the Virgin Mary, baby Jesus, and Abraham inside.
That's fascinating. So how did this religious site in this fragmented society actually bring people together?
Through pilgrimage. Once a year, Arabs from all over the peninsula would travel to Mecca for a pilgrimage centered on the Kaaba and the nearby sacred Zamzam well.
And during this pilgrimage?
This was key. Conflict stopped. Truces were declared across the board. People used the time to settle disputes, sort out debts, and importantly, trade flourished between different tribes.
So it created a kind of temporary peace zone.
Exactly. Mecca became the center of this loose confederation during the pilgrimage season. Guests had to follow certain rules, respect the truce, and this annual gathering around this shared sacred space, it really helped foster a kind of early common Arab identity, however fragile.
Interesting. What about the other city you mentioned, Yathrib, Medina?
Yathrib was also important. It was more of an agricultural center, located in a fertile oasis area in the Hijaz.
Agriculture, not just trade.
Primarily agriculture, yes. But it was also a key transit point for trade caravans heading up or down the Red Sea coast.
And who lived there?
It was a mix. Early on, Jewish tribes were quite dominant. The 𝘗𝑠h, 𝘐𝑴𝑛𝑢, tribes are mentioned. Alongside them were Arab tribes, like the 𝘂𝑠 and Khazraj, who would later play big roles in Islamic history.
What were the dynamics like between these groups?
Generally, the Arab tribes focused more on farming, while the Jewish tribes were known for being active in business and crafts. And with commerce comes
Usury.
Yeah.
Lending money at interest.
Exactly. It became common, practiced by both Arabs and Jews in Yathrib, something Islam would later prohibit, of course.
It's quite a contrast, isn't it? You have these nomadic Bedouins who often look down on settled life, maybe calling townspeople shopkeepers.
Right. A certain contempt for trade sometimes.
Yet, the rise of cities like Mecca, driven by trade and religion, seems absolutely crucial for even the beginnings of a shared Arab identity before Islam.
Precisely. The cities, despite the Bedouin ideals, became melting pots and focal points.
Okay, we've got a sense of the social structure, the tribal conflicts, the rise of cities. But what about belief? You mentioned polytheism at the Kaaba, but what was the broader religious picture?
It was incredibly diverse. a real spiritual kaleidoscope, you could say, across the Arabian Peninsula.
More than just paganism.
Oh, much more. So yes, Arab polytheism or paganism was probably the most widespread system. Each tribe, sometimes each city or region, might have its own main god or goddess, its own idols, and belief in spirits like jinns was common. The Kaaba, as we said, was a major center for this.
Okay, what else?
Then you had Christianity. It actually arrived quite early, maybe as early as the 1st century AD.
How did it get there?
Through various routes, Arab traders interacting with the Roman world, maybe missionary activity, linked to figures like St. Paul or St. Thomas. Byzantine influence was strong, especially in the north.
Were there distinct Christian communities?
Definitely. The Ghassanids, who were an Arab kingdom allied with the Byzantine Empire in the Levant, they converted to Christianity. And there's a very strong Christian community down south in Najran, influenced by the Christian kingdom of Aksum in Ethiopia.
Any particular types of Christianity?
Yes, reflecting the debates in the wider Christian world then, you saw sects like Nestorianism and Monophysitism being quite prevalent in Arabia.
Okay, paganism, Christianity, what else?
Judaism had a major presence. Jewish communities had been migrating into Arabia, especially the Hijaz, since at least the 1st century AD, often fleeing Roman persecution.
Like in Yathrib.
Exactly. They settled in towns like Yathrib, Khaybar, Taima. And it wasn't just migrants. Many local Arabs actually converted to Judaism. Sometimes it was even a condition for being allowed to settle in certain areas.
Whole kingdoms converted.
Yes, remarkably. The Himyarite kingdom in Yemen officially adopted a form of monotheism, then Judaism, in the 4th century, and parts of the Kinda tribe in Central Arabia were Jewish by the 5th century.
That's significant. Anything else in the mix?
There were the Hanifs, or the Hunafa. That's interesting. They were apparently monotheists, worshiping the one God of Abraham, but they weren't considered Jewish or Christian.
A separate Abrahamic path?
Seemingly so. They rejected idolatry, pagan practices. Some sources say they shared things like avoiding pork. And notably, some later Islamic traditions claim that Prophet Muhammad himself, before his revelations and some of his early companions, belonged to this Hanifi way.
Fascinating. Any other influences?
Just to round it out, you had small minorities, especially in areas closer to Persia, following Iranian religions like Zoroastrianism or perhaps Mazdakism due to the Sasanian Empire's influence.
Wow. So it really wasn't just simple paganism meeting Islam. It was this complex, diverse religious landscape already interacting with major world faiths.
Absolutely. Full of external influences and internal developments long before the 7th century.
We keep coming back to this idea that centralized states were rare, that Arabia often swung between tribal anarchy and maybe looser setups.
That's generally the picture, yes.
But were there any real attempts at forming larger states or kingdoms, even if they didn't last or unite everyone?
Oh yes, there were definitely attempts, and important ones. And the sources suggest a bit of a difference between the south and the north.
How so?
South Arabia, basically modern-day Yemen and surrounding areas, tended to have more established monarchies. It was generally seen as more developed, partly because it was a major trade route nexus for centuries, so more contact with the outside world.
Like the Sabaean kingdom, Shuba.
Exactly, the famous Sabaean kingdom. Later, around 280 AD, it was conquered and absorbed by the Himyarite kingdom, which became the dominant power there.
And the north.
North Arabia was more typically these loose tribal confederations we've talked about, or perhaps de facto city-states like Mecca, which operated more like oligarchies or aristocracies run by leading merchant families.
But wasn't there a movement between north and south?
Yes. Interestingly, from about the 4th century AD onwards, there seems to have been a kind of reverse migration. Southern tribes moving northwards. And culturally, the North Arabian script, the ancestor of modern Arabic script, actually started to spread and eventually replaced the South Arabian scripts.
Okay, so let's talk about some of these specific states history remembers. You mentioned the Himyarites.
Right, the Himyarite kingdom, definitely one of the most prominent pre-Islamic states based in the south. It was a monarchy, but power was shared with regional governors, a bit like feudal Europe in some ways.
How powerful were they?
At their peak, by the early 4th century, they controlled most of southern Arabia and had expanded northwards, maybe as far as Najran. We mentioned their religious turning polytheism. Then monotheism focused on the Abrahamic God.
And then Judaism.
Then Judaism, particularly under King Abu Kariba around the end of the 5th century. His son, Yusuf Dunuwas, became infamous for persecuting Christians in Najran.
And that led to their downfall.
It did. That persecution triggered an intervention in 524 AD by a coalition, the powerful Christian kingdom of Aksum from Ethiopia, probably with support from the Byzantine Empire. and local South Arabian Christians. They overthrew Yusuf.
So Ethiopia took control.
Ethiopia controlled South Arabia for a period. Their viceroy, Abraha, even built a huge church in Sana'a, supposedly to try and divert pilgrimage and trade away from Mecca.
Did that work?
Not really. There's a famous story mentioned in the Quran in Surah Al-Fil about Abraham marching on Mecca with elephants, intending to destroy the Kaaba, but his expedition failed spectacularly.
What happened after the Ethiopians?
The latter half of the 6th century saw this power struggle between the Ethiopians and the Sasanian Persian Empire for control of Yemen. Eventually, the Sassanids came out on top, and Yemen became a Persian province shortly before the rise of Islam.
Okay, that's the south. What about states in central or northern Arabia?
Well, there was the King Kingdom. This is significant as perhaps the first real attempt to create a unified state in Central Arabia, in the Najd region.
When was the
late 5th century. The King tribe managed to unite various tribes under their rule. They were strong enough to launch raids into Byzantine territory.
But they didn't last.
No. They clashed with the Sassanid Empire's allies, the 𝘉𝘁mids. The 𝘉𝘁mid vassals defeated and killed the Kingdom king around 529 AD, and the kingdom basically fell apart after that.
You mentioned the 𝘉𝘁mids. Tell us about them.
The 𝘉𝘁mid kingdom was based in eastern Arabia, near the Persian Gulf, centered around their capital, Al-Hira. They emerged around the 3rd or 4th century AD.
Were they independent?
Initially, yes, and powerful enough to raid Sasanian coastal areas. But the Sassanid emperor, 𝘱ephor II, captured their capital in 325. After that, they became crucial vassals, buffer state allies, for the Sasanian Empire against Byzantium and the desert Arabs.
Until when?
Until the early 7th century, not long before Islam's expansion, when the Sassanids decided to just abolish the 𝘉𝘁mid monarchy and annex the territory directly, a decision some historians think weakened Persia's defenses later.
Any other major players?
The last main one to mention is the Ghassanid kingdom. They were in the Levant, modern-day Syria, Jordan, Palestine area.
Also vassals.
Yes. They were the Byzantine Empire's main Arab vassals, sort of the mirror image of the 𝘉𝘁mid serving Persia. They were established by a part of the Al-Az tribe that migrated north from Yemen, probably in the 3rd century AD.
And they were Christian.
Yes, Monophysite Christians mostly, allied closely with Constantinople. Their kingdom, centered at Jabayah in the Golan Heights, served as a buffer for the Byzantines until it was overrun during the early Islamic conquests.
So when you put it all together, Himyarites, Kinda, 𝘉𝘁mids, Ghassanids.
What you see is, yes, attempts at state building, some quite significant for their time and place, but ultimately...
none strong enough to unite the Arabs.
Exactly. None were powerful or centralized enough to forge a single Arab state, or even consistently protect the whole region from foreign powers like Byzantium, Persia, or Aksum. Large parts of Arabia, maybe most of it, remained outside their control, still governed by those unwritten Bedouin rules.
So still largely fragmented.
Deeply fragmented. Constant tribal warfare, the vendetta system, harsh living conditions causing despair. And despite sharing, broadly, a language and some cultural traditions, pre-Islamic Arabs were profoundly divided by tribe, by blood feuds, and, as we saw, by a whole range of different religions and beliefs.
So we've painted this picture then, a complex, dynamic, often violent and fragmented pre-Islamic Arabia. You've got these fiercely independent nomadic tribes.
The Bedouins, yeah.
Then these emerging cities like Mecca and Yathrib, important but distinct.
Becoming centers of trade and religious activity.
And this surprisingly rich, diverse mix of religious beliefs, paganism, Christianity, Judaism, Hanifs.
A real tapestry. And alongside all that, these kingdoms rising and falling, trying to impose some order, but never quite succeeding across the board.
It's a land defined by division in many ways.
It is. And yet, this is the land, this deeply divided place, that was about to undergo one of the most dramatic transformations in history.
With the emergence of Islam.
Very soon after the period we're describing, yeah. Leading to the creation of that unified Arabic state and eventually the caliphate.
It really makes you stop and think. Just consider the sheer scale of that change.
It's staggering.
How does a society so rooted in tribal loyalty, in blood feuds, in these unwritten codes with all these different faiths, how does it manage to come together and build what became, for a time, the most powerful empire on earth?
That's the question, isn't it?
What does looking back at pre-Islamic Arabia, in all its complexity and division, tell you, our listener, about the incredible power of a unifying idea, a unifying force, whatever its nature, to completely reshape a civilization? Something to think about.